Today we are going to build this password generator app with HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We're gonna start with HTML structure for this app, then some CSS for styling, and then some simple JavaScript to make this app generate passwords. So I will put all timestamps in the description, and now let's jump into the code. As always, we start with an empty directory, and then let's do new file, now index.html. And here I will just put some HTML5 structure. Let's replace the title to password generator like this. And now let's open some preview. So let's put our app inside the div, and let's call this one div generator like this. And now the first thing we need is an input where we can print a password alongside with a button to copy it. So let's put an input of type text, and inside value let's just put test. And now let's also add some button that we can click to copy the password. And here we have it. Let's put those two in a separate div, and let's call this one div password, and those two should be moved here. Right, now the next part is a range slider. So let's create a new div, and let's call this one div with class name range. And here inside we need an input of type range, and with this range input we are going to define how long the password should be. So let's do minimum of, let's say, 4 and maximum of 24, and let's start with a default value of. Now I also need some indication about the value, so I will create an empty span here, or maybe with a default 8 value, so we can see what's the current value of this range slider. Alright, so the next part is those checkboxes where you can pick what type of password you want to generate. If you want to add some uppercase letters, or maybe some digits or special characters. So I'll put all those inside the div called options, and we need 4 options. So I will do div option times 4, and inside each we need a label, and inside each label we want an input of type checkbox. And we also need some span label where we can put some information about what this option is about. So now let's generate those. Let's do some small formatting here. So we have label, and then we have input and span, and then closing of the label, and then closing of the div option. All right. So now we have 4 checkboxes, and let's put some information inside those spans. So the first option will be A to Z. The second checkbox will be about uppercase letters. The third will be about digits. And the last option will be about some special characters. Okay, so now the last part is that we need the button to generate a new password. So under the options, let's just add a button with class name, let's say generate. And here let's add some label generate. So we have it here. All right, now the next part is we're gonna need some CSS to make it look prettier. So let's create a new file. Let's call this one styles.css. And now we're gonna need to link it here. So link styles.css. And now let's open our styles.css. Let's start with the body of our app. And I have already picked an background color, and it will be 1B262C. Yeah, so it will be dark. And the color of our text will be white, so it will be FFF. All right, so now our app inside generator div, let's make background color of it to 0F or C75. Yeah, that's better. Let's change the width of our app to 400 pixels. Yeah, now let's put some margin. Let's say 150 pixels from the top and the bottom, and auto from the sides. Now some padding. Let's go with 20 pixels. So we have some padding here. Now to make the corners round, let's do border radius, and here also 20 pixels. All right, now we want to fix the first row, so our input and the copy button. So as you can see, the first row with our input and button is inside a div with class password. So let's address our div here, div password, and I will change display to grid and template columns to auto. So the input will take as much space as possible, but the second param for our button will be min content. So the button, the second param, will take as little space as possible. All right, now with inside our div password, the input should be also prettier. So let's add some padding. Let's say 7 pixels from the top and the bottom, and 10 pixels from the sides. Now background color of, I have prepared here 3282b8. Oops, I forgot hashtag here. Now let's get rid of this angry border, so border 0. And I want to do rounded corners on this whole row. So inside the div password, I will do border radius of 10 pixels and overflow hidden. So everything that is outside of this div will be hidden. So the corners will be hidden. Now the text inside the input should be also white. So let's do color and FFF. All right, now let's fix our button. And here I will put styles for all buttons. So this button and this button will have the same styling. Background color will be 126298. I have prepared these codes and I'll put them in the description. Yeah, the color of the text should be also white here. Let's make text transform. So all text inside the buttons will be uppercase. Text transform uppercase. So now we have capital letters in both copy and generate. Now let's maybe add some padding. Let's say pixels from the top and the bottom, and 15 pixels from the sides. Let's get rid of this ugly border with border 0 and fix corners also on this button. Let's do border radius of 10 pixels. But now, as you can see, it rounded also those corners that we didn't want. So let's do div password and here the button inside. So the default for our buttons will be rounded corners, but for this button we'll do no rounded corners because those will be rounded automatically by this div password. So it's the border radius of 0. And now we have only rounded corners here from the side because of this div password with border radius. But here on this button, we have rounded corners on the button here. Now let's fix styling of our range slider. So here under we have div with class name range. So let's do div range and let's maybe add some margin. So margin from the top and the bottom, let's add 10 pixels and 0 from the sides. Now, same we did with our input and button. We want to make this range to take all the place. So let's do display and here grid and grid the template columns to 1FR. So take all the space possible and min content like this. Now I will make this indicator a little prettier. So this span inside range, let's add some CSS for it. So div range and span inside. Let's do background color. And here we're gonna use RGBA. So RGBA with zeros and the fourth param will be, let's say 0.1. So it will be 10% dark black. And let's add some padding of, let's say 10 pixels and some margin from the left, let's say 20 pixels. Now let's make it wider. So we'll mean width, let's say 30 pixels and text align should be center. Yeah, so the text is now centered. Let's also make the corners round. So border radius 10 pixels. Yes. Now let's style our options. So here's an option, another one. Let's transform them to clickable tiles. So here we have our options. And now for our div with options, we want also to do display grid, but grid template columns will be 1FR. So there will be 2 columns and each of the column will take the same amount of space, so 50%. So now for each div option, the label inside, we use label so we can click the checkboxes. Let's make the label display block. Now let's see how it looks like. Here we have the label. So now we can click the whole label and mark the checkbox. Now let's change the background of our label to background color and let's use RGBA. So we will put black color, but not in 100%, but only in, let's say 0.2. Yeah, but we want some space inside this grid between those labels. So here inside div options, let's do gap of 10 pixels. Yeah, now it's much better. Now also for each option, let's add some padding and say 20 pixels or maybe 10. Also rounded corners, so border radius 10 pixels. Yeah, now it's much better. Let's see if it's clickable. Yes, it is. But let's make the cursor pointer. So here let's do cursor pointer. So now it's a hand for clicking those buttons. All right, now the last part will be this generate button. So here at the bottom is the button that generate. And we want to make this button with 100% and some margin from the top. So it's the margin top of, let's say 10 pixels. Let's also add some padding 10 pixels will be nice. All right, now we are done with CSS. Let's add some JavaScript. So here inside my directory, I'll put new file, and let's call this one generator.js. And let's also link it inside our HTML. So here, let's do script, and source will be generator.js. And now let's open our generator.js. All right, so first let's define our function that we will call for generating passwords. So let's do function generate, and this password will generate password and we'll put it inside our input. So first let's try to put some information inside our input. So document, let's do query selector, and we have only one input of a type text. So let's use it, input type text, and let's put value of, we have test, let's put test2. Yeah, like this. Now let's call our function when the script runs for the first time, like this. And now we have test2. Now we want to know what checkboxes are selected. So let's go back to our index.html and let's see how it looks like. We don't have any indication on our checkboxes, so let's add IDs on those. So div, the first one will be div with ID, let's say lowercase checkbox. The next will be uppercase checkbox. The third one will be ID of digits checkbox, and the fourth one will be specials checkbox. Now we can easier find those checkboxes here. So on the beginning, let's define our dictionary. So the string with all possible letters and characters we can use to generate password. And now for each checkbox, let's add some extra letters or characters that we can use. So if the first checkbox is selected, let's do if document query get element by ID, and here lowercase checkbox. Let's check if it's checked. And if it is, then let's add to our dictionary all lowercase letters like this, but we're going to add and not replace it. Now I will do the same for the rest of the checkboxes. So for the second, for the third, and for the fourth, the second is uppercase checkbox, the third is digits checkbox, and the fourth has ID of specials checkbox. Now let's replace those strings. Now the digits, and now special characters. All right, so now we have dictionary with all characters that we can use. Now we need the length of the password we want to generate. So let's do const. We are going to use const because this value will not change, but dictionary changes, that's why it's let. So let's do const length equals, and now we need the value of this range slider. So let's do a document query selector, and we have only one of those. So let's do input and type of range, and here value. All right, so now we have dictionary with all possible characters and the length. So now we can generate password. But before this, I want to check if there is a length that is okay, so it's not -3 or something. And we have some checkboxes or options selected here. So I will check that if the length is smaller than 1 or the dictionary length is 0, then we are going to return nothing here. So the function will stop here. So we need some dictionary length that is bigger than 0. So we have some characters that we can use to generate our password. I will remove this empty space here. Right, so now let's define our password. That will be empty on the beginning. So now let's do for I loop with our length as a limiter. So I will be 0 on the beginning, and as long as it's smaller than the length, we'll do I++. So now for every length digit, let's add some character to our password. And here let's, from our dictionary, we need a random position. So let's do const pos. It will be a random position here from the size of our dictionary. And this will be math random times the dictionary length. And all this needs to be put inside math floor. So it will be rounded down. And now we can use this position here inside our dictionary. So we'll get a random position from our dictionary. So now the password should be generated. So let's put it instead of test2. So value equals password. Now we refresh our page. Now there is no password generated because there are no checkboxes selected. So our script stops here. So I'll go back to index.html, and as a default, I will make this first checkbox checked like this. Whoops, this should be plus equal here, equals plus. So plus equals, yeah, now it's better. All right, so now I want to regenerate password every time we change something inside those options or we click this button. So on click on those four and on click of this button, let's add events to regenerate password. So document query selector all, and for all inputs that are type of checkbox or a button that is that has class name of generate. With all those elements, let's change them to an array, because by default it will be an object of document nodes. And now inside this array we have all those elements. So let's do for each, and for each of those elements let's create a function here. And now for each element we want to add event listener that on click we want to run generate our password. So now if I click generate here, the new password is generated. I can add options here, and even if I click on the options, the password is updated. Or I can click generate or uncheck or check those options. Now if I change the slider, nothing happens, but if I click generate, it will generate longer password. So now the last part is to fix this slider, to update this value here, and also to regenerate our password. So now let's do document query selector, but not all, but only one single element. And here the only input that has type of range, it's only one element, so we can do add event listener directly here without any for each. And here we want to do on input. So if the input of this range slider changes, then we want to run a function. Let's do array function here, and let's do simply generate. So when we change this, it will regenerate password according to the length, because we are reading the length inside our generate function. But now we also want to update this value. So this value is inside a div with class name range, and here is the span inside it that we want to update. So let's do document query selector and div that range and span inside here. And here let's do inner HTML, and inside this inner HTML we want to put the number, and the number we have inside this input range as a value. So I will copy this selector like this and that value. So now if I change, it changes too, but there's a simpler way to do this. For every event we get an event object here that we can use. I will name it E as event, and now instead of this selector we can do event that target that value instead, so it will be shorter. Yeah, so this thing works too. All right, so now the last part is this copy to clipboard button. So to find this one, let's do inspect and let's see where it is. So inside div with class name password we have a button. So let's do document query selector div with class name of password. Here we have a button, so let's do button, and now let's do add event listener on click, and here an arrow function. Right, so now when we click on this button, we want to copy the value of this input to our clipboard. So let's first fetch our password. So const password pass, and we can get it from our input. So let's do document query selector input of type text, because we have only one input with type text. Otherwise we could add a div that password here on the beginning, and let's get the value of this input. So now the generated password is inside our const pass, and now let's put this password inside our clipboard. So to do this, let's do navigator that clipboard that write text, and here just password. This also returns a promise that runs after the text is copied to the clipboard, and I will use it. So I can replace the text of this button for like 1 second to notify the user that the password has been copied to the clipboard. So it's a promise returned here. So let's do then, and here let's put an arrow function. All right, and now after the password is copied to the clipboard, we want to replace this text to something else. So for this button, let's do inner HTML to say copied. If we click, it says copied, but after like 1 second we want to put it back, the original text. So let's do set timeout. The first is the function that we run, and let's say we should run after 1 second, and after 1 second we want to do the same thing, but we want to change it back to copy. Right, so now we can generate password this long with uppercase letters and numbers and special characters, and if I click this button it will copy to the clipboard. copied and it changes back to copy. So now I can remove this and I can paste my password that has been copied to the clipboard, or I can paste it here in the URL. It works. I can generate more passwords. I can copy to clipboard and paste it again. So that's all for today. Thanks a lot for watching. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one. Have a nice day and see you in the next one.